Rachel, welcome to the Tej Talks podcast.
Hello, Tej. Nice to talk to you.
No, you too. I read your article in YPN and it was interesting because we're talking about a subject or an approach or a strategy, whatever you want to call it, that isn't actually that often spoken about. And I think some people end up maybe doing it accidentally when it comes to like land. But there is a very, very, I would say, profitable and strong strategy in what you're doing. And of course, you're going to take us through why it's maybe better than some other strategies
Yes.
and who can do it, when they should do it, and a bit about how they can do it. But before we get into title splitting, could you maybe tell us what you were doing before property and then how you pivoted into property?
Yes. So the first thing I would say is my story goes back quite a long way. I'm in my early 50s now. And I was a really young mum, so I had my child young. I went to university whilst I had my first child and I was working. And I always knew I'd have a career. And I thought that I wanted a corporate career, like many of us do. I thought I'd go and have a corporate career. And I climbed to a certain level on the ladder. And if anyone finds me on LinkedIn, you'll see my background and my corporate career in there. I was a sales director for Equifax. I was a sales director for Experian. I was a general manager who ran a business and grew a business from 1 million to 8 million within 3 years. And that was in the, believe it or not, IT parts sector. So my background was very sales director, sales oriented. I had my first sales director role when I was 29. So it was all in the corporate world, all in sales, running teams of people, selling into the big banks. And it was very political. It was very political. And like most people, I think you get to a point where you get a bit jaded with that. So around 2014, I thought, you know what, I've had enough of this. I really want to start my own business. I'm going to go out and be a consultant, do this on my own. And I just started my consultancy business when I found property training. So I should say I'd done property since 2005, and I'd get a bonus and I'd buy a property. I'd not buy a property. I didn't have that much of put a deposit down on a property. And I thought I'll have those for my pension, but because I was a big salary earner, I was like, no, I don't really want any income out of them now because it's just going to make me pay even more tax. And I put them in as my pension pot. So I'd bought a few properties as an amateur investor. And if anybody's ever done that, they will know that sometimes you don't buy them in the right area. They were great capital growth areas, but they didn't have cash flow, which is quite ironic now that I'm talking about a strategy that's about giving you massive capital growth, because that is important, and cash flow. But they were capital growth. And then when I got trained as an investor, we moved to cash flow. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. And when you moved out of your job, was it because a lot of people are potentially in a position you were in or about to be? Was it scary? Was it a big jump, or did you kind of plan for it and it was all kind of expected?
I always knew that one day I would start my own business, and I think because my children were young and I had a family to support and I was the main earner, it was important. And like my daughter went to university, one of my daughters went to university. I was like, well, till they've got they're on the road to their own lives, I need to earn this big income. But literally, the 2015, my daughter she was finishing her last year in university in 2016. And I was like, no, this is it. I'm going to go and have that career that I really want. And that's what I did. So that was going to be about starting my own business. Now, the problem I had, and a lot of investors, when they first start out, they'll find that they're in a position where they can't really do it immediately. And I was in this position because the first thing that the people that I went and paid for my education, which I believe in, and I went along and I went to this commercial property finance course. So how do you get the money to do your deals? And the first thing they said to me was, you know what, you need to go and get a job. And I'm like, no way. I'm running my own business. I'm not working for somebody else again. So I had to work for 2 years till I could really get going, ramping up my portfolio, because I had to wait and get 2 years worth of SA 302s so that could show regular income, not just from a corporate career, but into my own bank account, into my own company, so that I could go and get mortgages to do property properly and build a cash flowing portfolio of properties. And I couldn't do that until I waited 2 years. So for those people who get frustrated out there, don't worry. You've got to get all your ducks in a row and then you go forward. And that's what I did. So I was ready. By the time I started doing the property, I was very confident I could earn the income I was in the sort of credit and fraud sector. And with GDPR coming and everything, there was loads of opportunity for me to get work. So I wasn't scared at all, really. And then when I did property, I definitely wasn't scared.
I like that. And I think also it kind of attests to taking the right advice, because, of course, mortgage lenders have affordability checks. Obviously, there's some which don't, there's some which have smaller ones, but it is important actually that people are thinking about quitting their job. You need to make sure that, your strategy aligns with it, and that your broker, or whoever you're speaking to is giving you the right advice. So you left that job, and you were buying kind of properties, I suppose, a normal way. Why? Because you were buying properties and, I know it wasn't necessarily making much cash flow, but you were buying properties. So what made you then want to get training?
Because it's like anything in life. If you are going to find the secrets that are out there, that are the golden nuggets, the light bulb moments of how to really do things, then the best way to do it is to invest in your education. You wouldn't expect, and I certainly didn't do it. So actually, I'd done a diploma in management previously, and that was when I was in the corporate world. That's when I was in a management career. That's when I managed teams of people, and that was the right thing to do. And that cost me £24,000. That wasn't cheap, right? So I had to do it privately, and I had to go to university outside of my job and do that and pay for that. So actually, when it came to investing in my education for property, I knew I'd literally grown a portfolio to about £500,000 by 2015. And that had taken from 2005, so that was 10 years. And I was like, I'm never going to be financially free from property. In other words, when COVID hit, my rents paid my way. And so there's no such thing as an easy ride in life, but I knew I needed the education to get to that supercharged ability to grow your portfolio. And that's meant that in those years since 2016 and onwards, I've actually traded in over £3 million worth of property. I haven't kept them all in my portfolio. I have flipped some. We've done some in our private name. We've done some in the company. But ultimately, we now have enough property in the portfolio to pay our incomes. And so that was the difference. So from 2005 to 2015, no speed. I couldn't do much between 2015 and 17, and then from 17 onwards, we did not 500,000, but £3 million worth of trading in property. So ultimately, getting that education supercharged my growth, and I felt like I don't want to take this to take 500 years. So we're steady as well. We're not, me and my partner in the business, and he's my life partner as well. We are steady. We don't go silly. We're not we don't want a get rich quick scheme. What we want to do is steadily build a portfolio that pays our income instead of a job. That's it.
I love that, because, my next question was going to be, how has it changed after training? But you kind of summarized it there with that figure, because, you compare £500,000 to 3 mil, obviously big difference there.
Yes.
And I think that just highlights how, because previously before training, you were doing it. So it does show that, hey, without training, education, you can do it. But
a little bit.
Yeah, but there's always something that you learn. There's always something that you don't know. You can consume all of the free content. I've got hundreds of hours of free content there for people, but you'll never, ever get the real. Sometimes I find it's the glue. You can find out, here's what a title split is. Okay, here's what a refurb is, but actually gluing together every single element, and actually knowing most of these elements, often comes from paying for training. And I think a lot of people learn this maybe the hard way, which is not having it, making mistakes, losing money. Hopefully no one loses money, but losing money, having issues, or in your case, I suppose, maybe growing slower than you felt you could and differently to how you could. And then it just shows you what is possible with the right training and education. Now, on that note, because, and maybe it was different kind of back then, but right now, education is a minefield. Like, if you pick the wrong person, it's literally like stepping on a mine. Like, it's a complete waste of money. There's a lot of scammers. There's a lot of rubbish out there. In your opinion, I suppose there's two questions here. How did you decide who to work with? And then from that, what are your tips for people listening about how they can find someone or a company to work with and be trained by?
Right, I've got a good answer to this now, and I think it's quite new because, like everything, I mean, you can imagine working in credit and working with fraud in GDPR, as GDPR was happening. Regulation is everything in that area. It's a nightmare. It's a minefield. Everybody was FCA regulated, which is Financial Conduct Authority. So I was used to working in that environment. Now there's starting to be recognition and regulation in property, and I think this will go forward. So for me, I think I felt lucky. I found a company that was actually legitimate. I know that there is some cowboys out there, and there are, but this company has reinvented itself a number of times. But the people who are running the training have been there a long time, and they were really good. The thing for me, though, is I'm an entrepreneur. And when I was in the corporate world, I would call myself an intrapreneur. So I'm always looking for a better way to do it. And most importantly, a way that not everybody else is doing it. Because if you follow the crowd and do it the same as everyone else, you get to a place where if you're all doing the same thing, in the same place with anything, and property is the same, and HMOs are a really good example, it gets saturated. Now, what I would say is you need to have that grounding in education. I'll come back to what we're doing to make sure that we're grounded in education, and what we show people in terms of title splitting, which we'll talk about in a minute, is we're going for the legislation. We're going to be counted. But the thing for me is any property training should be giving you skills that you won't learn in the free world. And that is things like, and there is a massive saying, you don't know what you don't know. I say to people that you don't know what you don't know. So you can sit there and you can think, I can do this on my own. And my partner, bless him, he was definitely a bit like, well, we can do this without the education. And actually in 2 years, he joined with, from 2015 to 17, he joined me in education at that point, because he realised that even if he wasn't on the same page as me, we knew how to do things in a way that meant we were not going to lose money. I'm going to give you an example. So we actually bought our first property. I'm going to call it our first property after education, during the education. And we spent, it's quite a lot of money this is, but we spent £30,000 on our education. I'm going to see your listeners falling off the chairs and going, wow, you wouldn't do that. Well, I'm going to tell you something. You would do that if you knew that you were going to do a deal where you got the 30,000 back just on a single let property on my first deal. And that day I knew that I'd invested wisely, but it is really scary. There is now something called PEAS, which is Property Investors Education Scheme, something like that. This is involved with the PRS, which is literally looks at how we regulate agents. So ultimately, we have, and many good property education programs in the UK are becoming part of this education scheme where you are checked up and legislated. So I'd never mention anyone on here, but for example, if we had complaints about our training, then we would be kicked out of that scheme. So we have got to deliver training that gives people the correct level of knowledge, but also is good value for money. And so I think that things in the property training industry are moving towards that, and I think that's a really good thing. I think anybody who's afraid of being regulated should not be doing what they're doing, because you've got to be a stand up and be counted. So I think we're gonna, as consumers, people are going to have more choice about choosing companies that have stood up to be counted. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also people need to kind of take stock of, I suppose, a company or person's marketing and how they present themselves, because, like you were saying earlier about kind of get rich quick, and it's very easy for a lot of companies to promote this get rich quick because it's exactly what society wants to hear. And society doesn't think that, actually, hold on, how is this possible? Like, so sometimes you really have to take a look at like reality, speak to people who are doing it and say, hey, I heard this claim from a company. Is this possible? And, we'll tell you no, because it takes 2 months to get, anything done in legals, because solicitors are so slow, and land reg and blah, blah, blah.
And the rest, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to kind of be aware or get aware of like the reality of it before jumping in with someone who's selling a dream and promising a world that doesn't exist, because it's so far-fetched, but they're so good at presenting it, right? So, really kind of look at people and how they present things and how sort of upfront and honest they are.
Yeah.
I think that's really important to look at as well. So, when you learnt about title splitting, which is what we're going to talk about today, did, and I suppose maybe the first question is title splitting something that you would have done for your first deal? And would you recommend it for people who haven't done property before?
So there's a couple of things here. So the first thing I would say is that title splitting is a strategy that will take everything you know in property and put it together, right? So, but so the answer is, if you have no education in property, and I don't mind, but I don't mean an education of watching free YouTube videos. I mean an education of actually investing in your own education, right? If you have not done any of that, and that's one option to do title splitting. Another option is you've done some property and you've got experience, because I did have some experience from doing my properties from 2005 to 2015, but I have a huge amount more experience in that shorter time frame because I'd got that education. And that meant that I was adding to my knowledge by doing the things I was doing, not testing. I mean, where else would you test whether it works or not, costing yourself tens of thousands of pounds? These properties are a lot of money. It's not like, I don't know, deciding whether you're going to invest £500 or something. I mean, literally, you put a deposit down of 25%, and that's why, if you're lucky enough to have had that deposit, that's wiped everything out of your bank account. So what I would say is the education gave me that. I would also say that the problem I had, and title splitting is a little known strategy. Now, I am going to imagine there's going to be people sat there now going, yeah, but they've been doing this for years, because actually title splitting is a legal process in the dictionary. It's a legal process for splitting a property. Well, for creating freehold and leasehold, right? So apartments. Well, of course, there's been apartments for years, but the reality is people have not done it properly. And so when I got educated, and this was really interesting, I went to my educators and said, right, you're sending everybody to do HMOs in Corby or Derby. I'll say Derby because it literally, I live in Derbyshire, so it's easy for me to say that. Derby because it's down the road for me, but many areas in the UK now that are saturated with HMOs, and literally all the investors were being sent to those areas. And because I'd done property before, I was like, I'm not doing that. I want to do something that, I'm an entrepreneur. I want to do something that is going to give me long-term capital growth. I want capital growth. I want equity. And I was saying to people who were training me, they'd done all this amazing grounding training. I've been trained on HMOs, I've been trained on rent to rent, I've been trained on how to find the money for deals, so creative finance. I've been trained on all these different subjects. But then I went and said, no, I don't want to do HMOs. I want to do title splitting. Can you show me how to do it? And they all literally went, no, we don't do that. We leave it till later. And the problem with leaving it till later is those who've left till later have lost hundreds of thousands of pounds when they go to sell. Those who now, developers title split all the time. They get a building, they develop it, they build it, and then they split the units as they sell them. So everybody thinks that means everybody title splits. But if you want to build a portfolio of cash flowing assets, which is what I wanted to do, I didn't want to sell them. I wanted them to be sale ready, but I didn't want to sell them. I hope that makes sense. So the answer to your question, because I've gone through all of that, is you can do this. I did a title split as my second deal after training. So I did that one that made me my training money back for 30 grand. Well, I actually got about 35 grand out of the deal. So I only just covered it by the skin of my teeth, but I still covered it, right? The second deal was 3 properties bought at auction, 2 of which were converted to apartments. So I turned 2 houses, 1 house I kept as a house, 2 houses into 4 apartments. That was my second deal out of training school. So the answer to your question is, you can do it early on. I certainly wouldn't do it as my first deal. But you do need to be able to prove that you can do this. It's slightly more difficult to get the finance because you've got to have some experience. But it's certainly not for the newbies. It's not for somebody who's brand new to property, never done a property before, because even if you physically did this and managed to borrow the money to do it, potentially from a private investor or something, when you went to finance it out with a bank, if you didn't have some experience, you might have an issue.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And it's good to kind of, I suppose, clear that up because, a lot of people starting out want to go into big things. Oh, I want to do development. I want to do land. I want to do all this stuff, which, as we'll speak about, title splitting is very profitable, a lot more profitable than, I suppose, it can be a lot more profitable than, a single kind of small flip. But the lessons you learn on those flips, the lessons you learn on those buy-to-lets, like you said, all kind of comes together in a title split. Now, you kind of gave a definition there of a title split, but I mean, could you give a few, not necessarily case studies yet, but just top level examples of where you've split a title, what it was and what it became, so people really understand what it is?
So what we started with, so that particular one that I've just told you about. So what happened is, went to auction and bought 3 houses at auction. This was a landlord who was selling his very small portfolio. And so we bought that portfolio. Now, the properties, and this is the key, if I'd have kept it as 3 houses, I did get a good deal. I would have been able to add value onto the 3 houses. Because actually, I think I bought it for about 173,000. I bought it for 173, and that 173 divided by 3 worked out at £57,666 a property. And no, this wasn't in the southeast. And it wasn't in the northeast either. It was actually in the East Midlands. So I bought this property, and this was in 2017. So even if I'd just done, say, a light refurb on each of the 3 properties, say I put new kitchens, new bathrooms, but it wasn't that sort of property. It was literally, I call it back to brick. So even if I'd have just bought the 3 houses, one of them I didn't take back to brick, but 2 of them, the ones that I turned into flats, I definitely had to literally, every bit of plaster came off the walls. It was full rewires, the whole works. So if I was doing that and I was just doing the 2 houses and they were back to brick, those 2, I'd have probably spent 30,000 per house. So it would have been a lot of money because, and I'm using that as an example, we spent more than that because we created them into flats. But if we'd have just turned them into houses, they've got their electric supplies, they've got the gas supplies, we'd have just refurbed the whole top to bottom. We'd have had to knock all the plaster off the walls. We'd have had to literally We wire the whole thing, brand new windows, brand new doors, blah, 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 brand new kitchens, brand new bathrooms. We'd have done that. They were two bedroom houses. If we'd have given us 2 bedroom houses and done that refurb, we'd have spent £60,000 on the 2 houses. As it happens, and they would have been, and this is the ridiculous thing, if we'd have spent that 60,000 on the 2 houses, so let me just do times 2 for the 57. So it'd have been 115,000 purchase price. Everybody's got a pen as they're listening to this. Then we'd have spent 60k on top of that. So that's 175k for the 2 houses. That would have been the cost in. They'd have only been worth 200,000 at that time. They're worth more now because capital growth, but they'd have only been worth 200,000. And more importantly, we'd have only got about £1,000 to £1,100 a month rent. And I haven't got time to waste my time, really. I mean, that, this is a lady who was earning 6 figures. When I say I don't want to go fast, I don't want to go particularly slow either. So what I did instead is I looked at those 2 houses and the layout was perfect for flats. And I knew that I could make 2 times 1 bed flats. Okay. So now I'm putting up my refurb costs, because my refurb cost for the 2 flats is going to be more than the refurb cost for the 2 houses. Why? Because I'm going to have to put new gas and electric supplies in for 2 of the properties. I'm going to have to put a new water supply in. I didn't do gas, actually, we just did electric. So we've got new electric supply, new water supply, still back to brick, extra kitchens, extra bathrooms. So what that ended up being, oh no, you're joking. Come on. I just dropped. Oh, you're still there. Sorry, I thought I'd lost you then. Can you hear me, Tej?
I'm here, yeah.
Really, really sorry if everybody thought that was a bit weird. I literally thought I lost you off my computer because my screen went blank.
That's all right. Christy, my VA, who's listening to this in a minute, cut that bit out. Remember to cut that out. And then we'll carry on.
Literally, you disappeared and I thought, oh no.
She'll cut that bit
I've
out.
Lost him.
You carry on as if from where you were.
Yeah, so I'll carry on. So literally, if I'd have done that as, by doing it as 4 apartments, which I had to get planning for, it cost me 90,000. So I invested that extra money. But the thing is, by the time I'd done that, so I invested an extra 30,000. So I'm just putting these rough numbers up there for people to understand. I invested an extra 30,000 to turn them into apartments. So it cost me more. But then, instead of them being valued at 200,000, I got a value of 260. Now, I like my 30Ks, guys, and I just said that because I spent 30K on my training. But that was another 30,000 extra for title splitting. Now, why? I split them properly. We have the freehold in one company and we have the leasehold apartments in another company. That means I can sell those apartments, but they're all in one, it's like one block, right? But the leasehold, 4 leasehold apartments and 1 freehold for the whole lot, right? Once I'd done that title split, because that's the title split, which I did, they were valued at £260,000. That's only a 30k uplift. But more importantly, the rent at that time, and this was 4 years ago, was £900 per house. Now, remember what I just told you? I'd have been lucky to get £5 to £550 per house. I'm now going to get £900 a month per house. That is a better number. We take it further than that. I can now sell that small block of apartments to an investor and I can get a commercial mortgage. And if people understand the difference between a commercial valuation on a mortgage and residential or a buy-to-let mortgage, which is a bricks and mortar valuation, I feel my surveyor shouted at me now. It's called a comparable valuation, not bricks and mortar, but I think property investors call it a bricks and mortar valuation. If I can get both valuations, that puts me in a position to take advantage of the capital growth in the market in the future. That puts me in a position when I go to sell them, of being able to sell them to individuals who want their first home, who are prepared to pay more than an investor is. And I'm in a position to take advantage of the capital growth in the future. And if anybody knows anything about capital growth, I mean, the East Midlands, where I am, in the last year, we've had about 7% capital growth. Now, we have had a boom, but in the last 20 years, that capital growth has been up, 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 up. We had a little drop in 2008, 2009. It went down a bit, and then it went up, 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 up. And this is the key. Title splitting is the golden egg. Title splitting gave me the opportunity to have the rent of the flats, so I got good cash flow, right? And the capital growth of individual properties versus just the growth of the rent, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I suppose there's a few things there we could look at. You said, it was better to be converted to flats, and you kind of knew that. For people who are starting out, I mean, are they going to have to pay an architect every single time to kind of understand if it can be split, or can they learn to just
wow. Yeah, no. So if you're going to split it, I would suggest using an architect, but you can do them on the back of a fag packet as well. What I would say to you, though, is there's much more to title splitting than just looking at the architect's drawing. In terms of title splitting, we need to know how to legally split it. We need to understand all the tax implications of splitting it. We need to have all the professionals around us who can help us to do that. And we need to have education. And the one thing that really was difficult for me, because remember, in 2017, I was just ending my education, and I was going to the educators and saying, can you show me how to do this? And they were saying no. I was like, well, I'm an entrepreneur. I've built businesses. I'm doing this anyway. And I remember my educator saying, well, why don't you get all the different people and we'll work it through together? And I'm thinking, no, I'm not doing that, because you're just going to train everybody else on this. I'm going to find a way to make this a process that I can help other property investors follow, because ultimately this is the golden egg. Because the HMO markets are saturated in many, many areas. Anybody listening to this who has well, I'll use Derby as an example, but we could be talking about places in the Northwest, the Northeast, everywhere in the UK. Anywhere that there's not an article for, new people have been sent to those areas. Property investors have been sent to those areas, or have gone to those areas and developed HMOs. The problem is there's that much stock now that sometimes the voids are longer, and a lot of the time, if it's a bigger HMO, the lending that you get from the bank is based upon the rental income and the yield. And if you are not filling all your apartments fast and getting the rental income and the yield, your valuation does not go up, it goes down. If you have capital valuation and capital, so these properties grow by capital growth every year. If you have a capital valuation, it will go up. So we're teaching people to get the cash flow like a sui generis HMO, and the capital growth like a portfolio of individual saleable properties.
And would you say that it's harder to find properties that can be title split versus, a single let or a HMO?
No, it's not at all. It's harder. You've just got to know where to go and where to look and how to look. And some of those things are quite complicated. But one of the things we do when we're working with our clients is we work down and enable them to be able to do that without so that they understand it. And being really honest, we don't share it with everyone. And the reason we don't share it with everyone is we don't want our clients that have had education in this to be saturated in their markets too. But yes, you are able to find deals. In fact, my business partner and I, my business partner's a lady called Harriet Dunn, and she is a commercial property trainer and a commercial lawyer. We often go on to live Zooms with our clients, and they'll say to us, oh, I invest in, I'm just going to use an example, I'll pick an area out of the Manchester. I can't find any deals in my area, and we will go on live and find them a deal, and we'll work through the numbers and we'll show them why that deal works. But if you don't know what you're looking for, of course it's hard to find it. But once you know what you're looking for, once you know it's not, there are deals out there. And actually, these properties, I have heard investors say to me, I found these flats in Derby. I wondered how I could turn them back into a HMO. I nearly fell off my chair. I'm like, no, don't turn them back into a HMO. A HMO is this is not the way to go, because ultimately, I'm not saying you shouldn't have HMOs, and I'm not saying you shouldn't build a portfolio of cash flowing assets, but we should diversify and have a mixed portfolio of different types of assets.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that makes sense. And then, I suppose given there is quite a sort of heavy legal element here, can people just use any old conveyancer and solicitor that they've bought their house with, or do they need someone a bit more specialist to do title splitting?
Yeah, they do. At the risk of upsetting any conveyancers that are listening, this is a hybrid strategy. This is one of the reasons it's nearly impossible to find people to do it, because there's commercial property and then there's residential property, and then this sort of sits somewhere in the middle, right? And so you've got a conveyancer who is a buy-to-let. A conveyancer is doing a residential property conveyancing. A commercial solicitor is doing commercial property conveyancing, right? And because they've got the title commercial solicitor, they might have even done title splits where they've done it for developers. But I have had conversations with commercial solicitors, and I kid you not, because we've had to interview many commercial solicitors to get to the root of, do they really understand how to do this? Because it's not just about splitting the property in a legal way. There's so much more to it than that. And we have interviewed them, and they've said, well, doesn't everybody title split? We don't think anybody doesn't do it. There are hundreds of properties out there that have not been done properly. And I'll come back and I will say that no, one of the things Harriet will really upsets Harriet, because ultimately our people we know have gone out and try and find somebody who can help them with this strategy. And this is not just the solicitor. We're talking about mortgage brokers. We're talking about everybody knows how to do this strategy. So what happens is the commercial solicitor will tell you to do it one way, but the bank won't let you do it that way. Or the accountant tells you to save tax this way, but the bank won't let you buy it in that way. So you really need to have to know a lot to do this strategy with any real purpose. And that's why when I first started out, it was really tough, because I had to work it out, and it nearly drove me insane. I tried power team members and they were not good enough. They did not know how to do it. I was lucky that I found a couple that did, but even then they only knew their own bit, and I had to put all the pieces together myself. Now, then I met Harriet, and Harriet, being a commercial lawyer who had done a lot of this, she understood it from the developer's point of view. But we took the two things and put them together, and we built around how this works now. And there's other things like freehold and leasehold is massively going to change in the UK. And yet people, and if I can just give people one tip out here, do not go and buy freeholds. This is going to change. There is not money in owning freeholds. There might be short-term money, but the government is trying to change freehold and leasehold in the UK. And whereas developers were putting freeholds for sale, and then people were buying them and running them as a passive income portfolio, be really careful. I would not be touching them, because things are going to change. And what we do is make sure people are ready for that future that's coming, and that they're making money out of the cash flow from the leasehold apartments.
Definitely. I mean, there's certain businesses, companies who own millions of pounds worth of freeholds. It's their only business. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how these changes affect the kind of big players in that sense. But also, you always see them in auctions like freeholds for sale, and they're often quite cheap. But yeah, someone knows something. And
don't touch them. I can only say to your readers, do not buy freeholds. You are biting off a problem, and just be careful. I won't do it.
Yep, that people, you've heard that here first. And you were saying earlier, kind of like, you had to kind of put the pieces together yourself, and there were kind of things where one member would say something and the other member would disagree, and it wouldn't actually work. And you know, title splitting is obviously way more complex than say buy to lets or flips. But thinking about my experience in buy to lets and flips, the same thing kind of happens. It's like when I
It
didn't
does.
used to know, it would be like, oh, so we can't actually do it that way, and that's okay. And sometimes if it's to do with your mortgage and you've lost an exit, you've got kind of real problems. So for people listening, having the right people, and also the right people who are in agreement, or at least will speak to each other, which is half the bloody battle with these people sometimes, is so important, because you don't want to buy a property without an exit. You don't want to buy, even if it's a flip, the person buying it has to be able to get a mortgage in most cases to buy it off you. There has
Yeah,
to be an exit for your exit. So, I just thought there was a parallel there with even with the simple stuff. And
true. It's very
with
true.
with title splitting, you've kind of given an example there of kind of houses to flats. Now, that's probably the most common title split you hear of. But am I right in saying, you can do it with land? You could do it with some old
Oh,
cottages if they like. You could do it with anything to an extent.
yeah. There's so much opportunity with title splitting. So once you know the amazing skill, you will be able to go and do it with land. You will be able to build properties from scratch and make sure the titles are split properly in the first place. And the key thing here is the thing about title splitting is you as a developer have to understand it well yourself, so that you can make sure your team deliver the exact outcome that you personally are looking for, right? That's the key. So my favorite ones that I've seen people do, and actually I'm doing one of these myself at the moment. So if you see me on LinkedIn, or you'll see me talking about a property and a piece of land next door, is you can buy a house, you can apply for planning on the land, you can split off the land. Now, splitting that at the right time is absolutely crucial, because if you do it in the wrong way, you could scup and create the wrong title deeds for the land. That could have an impact. So it's really important that you have the right type of solicitor to help you with that transaction, and that you understand what you're doing. But the other thing is, if you live in one property, and develop another one in, say, for example, the garden next door, or even on another piece of land, when you move out of the one property that's your principal primary residence, if that was your home, you will not have to pay capital gains tax, and you can then move into the other property. So there's lots of tax advantages, but also you can buy land, you could actually sell land. The other thing that people don't realise and don't think about is, what about title splitting commercial properties, right? Commercial properties are ripe for title splitting. Many businesses these days want their own little unit. Could you have title split units? There's so much. Could you build property and title split it so that you can sell individual units? There's just so many opportunities with title splitting.
And am I right in saying that this could be a less profitable approach to title splitting, but you can title split, and you mentioned it there, without actually having to do any refurbs and working with builders?
Yeah. So what I would say, I would be careful, because you could technically, right? Technically, you could. So I could buy something that, I'm going to give you an example. I could buy something from a landlord, say, who hasn't split it properly and split it upon purchase. However, you've got to be seen when you're going to get finance on a property, the bank are going to ask you exactly what you've done to that property. Funnily enough, I was training some of our clients today, and we were going through a valuation pack, and we were looking at what valuers are asking for. And one of the things they'll ask for is your schedule of works and how much you've spent on the property. If you haven't spent anything on the property, you have to be honest on this stuff. I am a great believer in, if you do everything straight, you will never have an issue or be getting caught out for not doing things the right way. So what I do is I show people that, you've got to be able to show the bank that you've spent money on that property. And so I would say technically you can, but whether you will add the value that way, the ideal is to buy something that's dilapidated and needs work on it still, as it is with any property investment. If you're looking to add forced appreciation. So you're looking to appreciate the property now. However, certainly I've got examples where I've bought buildings where if the landlord had done this properly, he'd have been selling it for a lot more money to me than he is doing.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And, I suppose as we kind of have come to a close here, we've been speaking about the profitability of title splitting. Could you maybe share with us a case study, maybe your favorite one, just so we can see if you sold it or if you kept it, but just kind of some of the numbers so that people, when they're considering this approach and this strategy, they can kind of see what's possible?
Yes. So I've got a couple of examples. I'm going to start with one that's a little bit more, and I've actually already talked to you about this. This is the property that I bought the three houses, and I turned two of the houses into 4 flats. So I'm just going to talk about those for a moment. Mm-hmm. Because I did that 4 years ago, I can actually see the appreciation. And it's in a small Midlands town, and the property values are not really high, because one of the questions we get asked about is, well, where does this work? And the answer to the question is, this is one of the most beautiful things about title splitting. You don't have to drive up. If you live in London, you don't have to go to Newcastle on Tyne to make this work, or Nottingham, or, there will be places in the southeast, I'm not going to say in London, but in the southeast, where you can make this property work, because you're looking for areas where you've got capital growth and good rental cash flow. So remember, if you have had training, you'll have been told to go for cash flow, probably. But this is areas where the market shows that you get good capital growth, but you also can buy properties for a reasonable price so that you can generate good cash flow. Now, and so the rental incomes are okay. Now, I bought this property, these 2 properties in a small market town in the Midlands. It's the sort of town where people like to stay. So you leave home from your mum and dad, and then you get your first apartment, and then you get your first house, and it's like that. But the other thing, in all these areas, you've got developers coming in and developing old mills and things like that, and turning those to fancy apartments. So this worked in my favour, because I bought these properties and they were valued at 65,000 each. Remember, I said it was 65 for one house, 65 for one apartment, so that's times 2. So it was 130 for 2 apartments, and then it was 260 for 4 apartments. Fast forward 4 years, I'm going to tell you what they're now worth at bricks and mortar value. So at the value based upon the valuations in the market today, right? So these properties at the moment are worth, the apartments are worth 82.5 each. So if you do 82.5 times by 4, they are now worth 330,000. This is 4 years later. That works out, you can do the math yourself, but it works out at 6.73% per annum. Fast forward this to 2029, that then means that those apartments in 2029 are worth 531,000. That's assuming that from 2017, they grew every year at the same 6.73%. Now, I don't think they'll grow at 6.73% per annum. I don't think that. So everyone's like, she's smoking, she's having a laugh. I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're probably more likely to grow at about 4 or 5% per annum. But just bear with me. If I had just gone and not split them, so I'd created the apartments, I spent the money, but I didn't split them, and I kept them as what we call a multi-unit freehold block, right? In 2000, this is the truth, because nobody will raise rents at 6.73% per annum. And commercial mortgages, which is the only option that had been available to me, if I didn't split them, only based on rental income and yield. So the rental would grow at an average, inflation is where it's normally at, 2% per annum, right? Now, we are getting much higher numbers in some areas. Let me tell you why. If I put a new tenant in, I'll get the market rate. I'm on about when the tenant sits in there and stays for years. That's 2%. Just using like with like on what I could refinance for this for in October 29, if I had them as single, as one unit, so 4 flats in one multi-unit freehold block, I would be getting a valuation of 326,890
Wow.
based on rental income growth. If I do it as apartments at 6.73%, it's 531. If I just bring it down and do it 5%, it's 449,280. So even if I only did it at 5% growth, the difference is over 100,000 just on that 4 little tiny flats. So guys, you cannot afford to not leave this till later. The growth opportunity is huge. And the main thing is I'm getting all that cash flow. The other thing I've done is I do them in Nottingham, and in Nottingham, I bought one building for 210. The refurb was 130. It's 4 apartments. It's just been valued at 500,000. And that one was bought at the beginning of 2020. And it's just been valued at 500,000. So if you want to add that up, I bought it for 210. I spent 100. It was actually 135. So 210, 310, 345, and I've just had it valued at 500,000. And more importantly, the rental income on the 4 apartments is the equivalent of a HMO in the area. So I'm happy.
I mean, yeah, it definitely makes sense. And I think it's kind of another, it's kind of like having a toolbox and having different ways of adding value. One is the most common one, which is just doing a refurb. But then title splitting, as you're kind of showing there, can add a level of profit that you don't have to put in as much money or time. And I suppose because a solicitor does a lot of the kind of legal, technical, heavy lifting, you'd hope. And you get, quite a significant uplift. And that's quite, especially in a market like now where, finding a general refurb deal is very difficult. Finding a BR or a flip right now that's just a, doer upper is becoming increasingly difficult. Title splitting is still something that not a lot of people are doing or talking about or know how to do. And so it's a very, very valid way to add value that may need less work than what we're used to or kind of what we're told. And like you're saying there, kind of maintaining and increasing capital appreciation, which HMOs, because of their sort of, if you get them done commercially or either way, the lack of exits or the overinflated commercial valuation, it really just show you actually. I kind of look at title splitting, especially when you get a big house and convert it into lots of flats, kind of like buy to let on steroids, because
it is right. It's like you're buying one property and doing 4 buy to lets in one deal.
Exactly. Whoa. And compared to a HMO where the humans, oh, he took my milk, oh, they smell in the morning, all this crap, you've just got 5, 6, 7, whatever it is, single lets, which I love because of the management and because of capital appreciation, but in one. And I've had other guests on here as well who do this strategy, and the figures speak for themselves. And like you said, it's not necessarily for beginners, but I think when you reach a certain point, buying one buy-to-let at a time, and I'm sort of in that position, and you get a bit like 3
too long.
This is too long. It does. And then it kind of, if you think about it, 3 or 4 buy-to-lets potentially cost the same as a big house converting into flats or something like that. So, when you really look at it, I think there comes a point for all sort of single let investors where you're like, let's just do this so much quicker. And that's what title splits are. So Rachel, obviously I'm going to put the links to your website, your training, all that stuff in the show notes. But what is the best way for people to get a hold of you, to find out more and maybe to see what you're up to?
Yes. So what we have, I've done a special offer for your listeners. She's going to share a link with you, and Harriet and I, and honestly, the value of this, I can't believe we're doing it, but we normally charge £97, but we have, we're just, and it's only a masterclass. So this is just going to blow your mind in terms of possibilities. But we do a masterclass that is between 2 and 2.5 hours. So it's a lot of value. And if you book that through Tej Talks, you will get it for £29, right? So that is not a big investment. Why? Because we want you to see the possibilities of this strategy. So if you, I've done that offer for, we don't give it free because there's a lot of content in there, and we're not in the habit of giving free content. So I've shared some free stuff with you today, but ultimately there's more nuggets of information in there, and it's only £29. So just bob in there. We do have a website as well, but actually, even if you go through the website, it will take you back to that, and you'll end up having to pay more for it. So go to, just literally click on the link that Tej is sharing with you, and you can buy that for £29. We have different masterclasses. You can come on and you can hear how we're actually making this strategy happen. And we'll have, we do it on a webinar, so you can see it on the screen. We'll share some of these numbers with you, and we'll share you how much money you can. I mean, the fact is, you know, would I ever do a single let again when I can do 4 single lets in one? Probably not. Would I ever do a HMO again? Well, just to prove a point, I've just had planning on a massive sui generis HMO in Nottingham, and I'm actually going to sell it with planning on because I've got a good uplift from that. Why? Because I would rather focus my energy and effort on this type of strategy, because I'm not interested just in the short-term cash flow. I'm interested in building a portfolio that I can leave to my kids, a portfolio that I can sell for massive profit as the market grows. And 20 years from now, you know, if that portfolio doubles in value, which it certainly has in the last 20 years for people, then I'm going to have all that capital growth appreciation. And I certainly won't want to be sat with big HMOs that I can only get commercial valuations on in the future.
Yeah, no, well said. And look, my listeners, don't say I don't ever help you out. Yeah, look at this discount that Rachel's giving you. So click the link in the show notes and you will be taken directly to that. And all that's left for me to do is say, Rachel, thank you so much for coming on the show. Title is something that interests me. I know there's going to be lots of my listeners who are interested in this and are at that kind of stage where, like you said, would you buy another one or would you buy 4 for 1? So Rachel, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tej. Lovely to meet everyone, and I hope they enjoy the recording. Thank you.